I don't really need to say very much at all because Rob tells me he has it all in hand, so I'm going to hand over to Sir Rob Fenwick to kick everything off. Sir Rob's a very important name in terms of the germination and culmination of predator-free. He has too many hats to list right now or it would take up their whole session, but he is the chair of the Predator-Free New Zealand Trust, board member of Predator-Free 2050 and an advisor to the Next Foundation. So just the man to get the conversation started, and there'll be an opportunity for questions from the floor throughout this session. Thank you.
Well done. Kia ora tātou, everyone. Maybe I can just explain how we're going to run the next 45 minutes. As you're aware, Minister Wagner has had to dash off to a cabinet meeting, so the panel is just the three of us, Arihia, Mervyn and myself. And so we think that in conferences like this, the more time that we can have for discussion and a free flow interaction with the audience, the better. So we are going to try and keep our part of it relatively tight and have plenty of time for discussion and questions from the floor. When you're talking, you're not learning. So we want to listen and see what the floor has to say. So I thought I'd just start with a few comments, a brief sort of chronology, if you like, of progress with predator-free since Paul Callaghan's immortal moonshot speech, and then make a couple of other sort of observations about the challenges that we're facing in the predator-free movement, and then introduce Mervyn and Arihia. So if you look back over the last 4 or 5 years, maybe more, since Sir Paul's speech, I think the first thing we've got to consider is the shift within DOC, the shift to the partnership model in DOC, when DOC stood up and said, we can't do this alone, and invited the whole conservation movement, if you like, to become partners. And this has been, as we all know, a work in progress within the department, but it has meant a huge shift in the way in which the main agency responsible for conservation and responsible for predator management engages with the world. And as a result of that, we've seen numerous partnerships evolve, and I guess not the least being the acknowledgement and respect that has occurred in partnerships with volunteers and community conservation organisations all over the country, and I know many of you are in the room. So I think that's the first thing, that that Lou is championing, the partnership model. The next thing I would note is the arrival of the Next Foundation. And actually, the other thing that it signalled was the arrival of Devon McLean. Devon, of course, had been around for a long time. He was the architect of Project Crimson and Project Janzoon. But within the framework of the Next Foundation, and with the Ploughman's incredibly generous $100 million and half of that for conservation, it's enabled Devon and the Next team to really apply some sharp focus to this challenge of predator eradication. And, you know, he has championed ZIP, he's championed Project Monga, he's championed Predator-Free Wellington, and, you know, he really has been a huge ally for this movement, and we would just like to acknowledge what he's done and what Next Foundation has brought to the table in inspiring other philanthropists to engage in this hikoi. I think the other thing that as I mentioned earlier, is the acknowledgement of the army of volunteers that has come about through in the last few years. And that's what inspired the Predator-Free New Zealand Trust that we established a few years ago with a pretty generous donation from Gareth Morgan. Sam Morgan is on our trust, along with DOC and Osprey and regional government and land care research, Esri, the Eagle Foundation, technology people, universities in Victoria, Waikato, all these organisations. But the principal purpose of the Predator Free Trust is to connect all these community conservation groups and volunteers throughout the country. And we do this through a map, we do this through a website, we do this through social media, trying to inspire existing community volunteers and recruit new ones. And those of you in the room who are in that category, I commend you to keep in touch with Predator Free New Zealand Trust. It's a key part of the whole Predator Free movement, and Rebecca Bell and Jessie Morgan do a great job there. The third thing I'd touch on is the development of the National Science Challenge that Andrea Byram leads, the Biological Heritage Science Challenge, which again has brought some research focus to this task, because we are not going to achieve Predator Free New Zealand without new tools, as we all know. And that is the principal focus of the National Science Challenge, and they've got the best scientists in the country. And in fact, with international support and collaboration, particularly around the genetic challenge that is on the horizon as one of the tools we're going to need to deal with predator eradication, the challenge has been enormously important. So those are kind of some of the things that are going on on the landscape, and it culminated in the decision by the government to create Predator Free 2050, a Crown-owned entity with an independent board whose task was to fund landscape-scale predator management projects on the basis of leveraging its funds with third-party funds. So for every dollar the New Zealand taxpayer has put into Predator Free 2050, there's a $3 return for them. It's a great model, it's a great deal for the New Zealand taxpayer, and it's going to, what it does is it coalesces all these interested parties around some specific projects which are going to be the focus of it. And Arihia and Mervyn are going to be talking a bit more about what Predator Free 2050 actually does and how it is going to operate. So I thought I'd just spend the next couple of minutes talking about what I think is the biggest challenge that we have in the Predator Free movement, and that is how we're going to drive it into a positive national movement that engages all New Zealanders for generations into the future. Because this is not like the excitement that we can generate in a single sports game or in something that where New Zealanders have been very effective in the past about getting excited about things. This is a long-term project that our children and our grandchildren will need to continue, and we will need to set the groundwork for them. How do we ignite the hearts and minds of every Kiwi? Because the reality is, at the moment, the predator-free movement does not have a high visibility. Freshwater, important as it is to all of us conservationists, has a higher profile than the predator movement. And we need to find ways to lift the profile of the predator-free campaign into a universal national movement where everybody feels they have a role to play. And it seems to me there are two simple principles here that we have to achieve. And the first is to attract enough public attention to what we're doing, and this is no easy task in a noisy, soundbite-driven world. And secondly, how do we inspire enough community action to lead into a sustained national movement that goes on for several generations? Now, as we all know, conservationists have been railing about predators for more than a century. This is a well-worn path for all of us, and Well-intentioned, positive campaigns have been mounted before, like bringing back the Dawn Chorus, but they have not really sustained the energy of the country. And I think that's largely because people haven't cared enough. They care, but they haven't cared enough. And I don't think they see for themselves a role in these campaigns. And it's partly, I think, because they had the impression that Doc was going to do it, so they didn't have to worry about it. That was a turn-off. And so the point I made earlier about the shift in Doc to the partnership model, accepting the fact we can't do it by ourselves, we need everybody, is a really major shift in opening the door for more participation. But clearly we have to do something different. The campaigns in the past haven't worked, and so I return to the problem: how do we get people to care enough? How do we reach across the whole New Zealand community, from school children to their busy, hard-working parents, to people young and old, to the glitterati, if you like, of sports and the media fraternity, to people everywhere? We have yet to make a compelling case, enough of a compelling case, about what's at stake. Firstly, with the plight of our threatened species, and secondly, the national benefit that will come from eradicating the predators that are destroying them. From an economic point of view, and we've done a lot of work on this, the case is a no-brainer. The eradication of the suppression of predators at the moment, involving not only the obvious costs of the major government agencies, but the thousands of hours of volunteer time and and the work of property owners and volunteers and everyone else, is an eye-wateringly high number. And the opportunity to offset that through an eradication program is a compelling economic argument, and we need to keep making that case about what the value to the New Zealand taxpayer is, the economic value of getting rid of these predators permanently. And of course that also needs to be seen in the context of how we're going to ensure that our borders in the future can be protected from reincursion. But there's a more powerful narrative here, folks, that we need to stir the hearts and minds of Kiwis, and it's about our national identity being on the line. We New Zealanders have a really unusual and deep affinity with our native flora and fauna. It's an expression of how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in the world, and I just want to kind of exemplify that in a few words about Kiwis. It's about 100 years since we started calling each other and calling ourselves Kiwis, and it was at the time of the First World War, I think, when the Kiwi Corps went off to Europe. And we do it because we're comfortable with the idea of being characterised as a little flightless bird with curious feeding and mating habits, and only comes out at night. And we do it, I think, because it's so exclusively ours. It's such an unusual and quirky creature that we feel a lot of empathy with that name. A century ago, the population of Kiwi in New Zealand was numbered in the millions. They were everywhere. And since that time, they've been on a steady path downwards, as we all know, towards extinction. What a disgrace. What a bloody disgrace that the creature that we hold so dear to ourselves, that we would name ourselves after it, we would allow to get into that plight. Well, that is all about to change, and by 2020, I'm very confident that we will be announcing that for the first time in 100 years, the Kiwi population is on the increase again. And the reason for this is, I think, because the Kiwi for Kiwi Trust and the government have invested in this new plan to reverse the decline. And the reason for the new plan, I think, was twofold. Firstly, because of the uptake of the predator-free idea, we now have a large number of predator-free habitats where we can start circulating kiwi chicks, and that will enable us to accelerate the population over the next 4 or 5 years and get up to this plus 2% population target that we are aspiring to. And secondly, because the government, once it was made aware of the prospect of extinction, realised that it simply couldn't happen on its watch. And I make that point because it illustrates the power in a political sense, and so, it illustrates the power of national identity and how important biodiversity is to all New Zealanders. So I just want to finish on the question again of how we ignite this national movement around predator-free. No one's done it before in the world. There is no manual. What we do know is that we have this magnificent army of volunteers. DOC estimates about 200,000 Kiwis are out there every weekend baiting their bait stations and setting their traps. But there are still not enough Kiwis who care enough, and there's not enough of them who can see a role for themselves in this massive intergenerational campaign. As I said before, this is a long, slow burn. I see it as a series of battles within a long-term war, a series of victories, and there will be stumbles, and we'll learn from each of these experiences. But this is something, because wars in the past have worked when they engage citizens around the threat of an evil invader. And we haven't had one of those actually in New Zealand. We've sacrificed a lot of lives for invasions elsewhere around the world. But here in New Zealand is a insidious and loathsome invasion that threatens the things that we treasure and hold dear. And we should be able to find roles for everybody, from young to old, to brown to white, to rich to poor, doesn't matter, to find places for everybody to feel part of this campaign, that is threatening the very things that hold our national identity. And that's the value of biodiversity, if people ask you. That it strikes at the heart of us as New Zealanders and our national identity. And we need to find a way of galvanising that and getting it into the living rooms of everybody. The board of Predator Free 2050 is sort of grappling with this notion at the moment. In fact, it will be, as Lou said a minute ago, it's as much a project for the millennials and the next generation who will be picking this up and taking it forward as it is for us. And we may very well, be bringing in teams of students and young people to help us get our arms around this idea. But that is the task. If we're going to be successful with Predator Free 2050, that is one of the tasks, is to get everybody on board. There are other important, of course, components of it, which we're going to hear about now. So that's really what I wanted to say in my introductory remarks. And we're now going to throw to Mervyn and then to Arihia.
Good morning. Thank you very much for coming. And I know that some of you have come a long way to be here, some even from Australia. So it's wonderful to be here today. Rob's already given you a little bit of an insight into predator-free journey over the last decade or two, which has been building. My role in DOC is to work with principal people like Rob and various other leaders, and over time build the predator-free system through the country. So we'll just talk about that for a moment. We can look at predator-free as being a policy goal, but what do you do then? Government makes an announcement. How do you actually make predator-free happen? Do you erect a bureaucracy? Do you sort of sit and wait for the Kelvin Hasties to come out of the woodwork and sort of make it happen spontaneously? And that's an issue that we have done quite a bit of thinking about. So at the moment, you could say there's 3 or 4 core entities, with the board, the trust, and DOC. But there's also, we're very aware there's also many other entities that are already doing parts of this work, and some of them very successfully so. I think, how do I work this machine? Is that what I do? Green button in the middle. Okay. But I think the critical success factor that we have to keep forefront in our minds is that we are creating a collaborative nationwide system. We're not creating a massive bureaucracy where the bureaucracy consumes all the resources that should be spent on the actual task. And that's a little bit of a challenge for people as to how do you bring order to a system that will be effective, but at the same time don't have the system that's organising that consume all the resources. And all the people that I've spoken to are very committed to this whole concept of building the social movement in an organised sort of way. So, DOC's had to think carefully about its role. Partnership is fundamental to what we do. Rob's already talked to you about that. On one hand, we're responsible to Parliament for the money that we get to help promote this thing. But on the other hand, actually our major role is to help make people successful. Sometimes that actually means staying out of their way. So we actually don't necessarily help Gavin Hastie by making his life difficult with more processes and requirements around him. We're actually better to get behind him and support him. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. It will take several years to build the system. It'll grow organically. We're already seeing today there's been multiple examples given to you of where communities are taking the responsibility themselves, whether it be Wellington or Picton or Dunedin or whatever, and they're just getting on with it. What we do know is those communities need different levels of support. Some of them are relatively self-sustaining. Others, like some people came to us not so long ago and said, we've got X number of traps out there and we're out there every weekend, but we can't make progress. Actually, what they needed was good technical advice about how to set up those trap lines and have the right number so they could actually get some sort of momentum. So this, I know that people sometimes sort of say, what is happening with predator-free? When is it going to actually really get cracking? Well, it is already getting cracking, and if you can accept the concept of organic development over time and people getting increasingly connected over time, then you'll understand how predator-free is actually going to work. I have immense faith in Kiwis to over time work together increasingly and achieve what we need to achieve here. And there are so many good examples of that already starting to happen. There is occasionally what I call the inclusion paradox. If we try and connect to everybody at once so that everybody knows everything that's going on, we'll be so busy connecting there actually won't get much done. So this is the whole important point that the government actually isn't putting in place a great big structure to enable this to happen, but it's working very determinately behind key players to actually help that connection, and that connection will grow over time. We do have some focus. This, when I say grow organically, it's not quite as haphazard as that. There is actually some deliberateness in what we're doing. A critical focus for the next 12 months is building the landscape scale system. So that is getting, Osprey, the dock operations, the regional councils, and some of these bigger projects working together. And of course, Predator-Free Limited will be strongly connected to that and making decisions about what are the projects it's going to get involved with and sponsor, and it will consider quite carefully what else is actually going on. So the landscape scale work is really important. It doesn't just happen that all those entities suddenly start working together. It actually takes some deliberate thinking, and Mike Slater and his team are working very carefully on that, along with some very good people from regional councils and iwi as well. The community network, ministers this morning announced some community rangers. They're already working very closely with the trust, Rob's Community Trust. That already gives us a network through the country. So when communities get enthusiastic about what they're doing, decisions are made about who is the best person to support them. Sometimes it's a regional council, sometimes it's a dock ranger, sometimes it'll be some other community group that knows what it's doing and can go and do that work. So there's not one answer fits all, but we do want to have organisation through at that community level. Rob's already talked about the importance of the campaign, which will in actual fact be a series of campaigns over multiple years, to not just draw people in. I think there's already many people being drawn in. They are very excited by this whole idea of taking care of their land. And this is a real opportunity for them to do that. But they do need good information. They do need to understand the best way to go about the task. So there is actually a bit of a mix of providing that good information and tapping into their enthusiasm. And we're already working closely with the Predator-Free Board before their CE's even here, and with the Trust, and increasingly with other parties about how we build that communication process. Sorry?
Nearly there.
Yeah, am I talking too long, Rob?
No, we're right.
That's all right.
There's
Okay.
a young lady down there with a sign that you...
2 minutes, right, okay. Thanks, all right. So I'll just stop there, I think. That's a good way to stop, and I'll leave it there, Rob.
Very good, no, good on you, Mervyn. Very good. So Arihia, welcome to the floor, Arihia, as a member of the board of Predator-Free 2050 Ltd, and of course the Chief Executive of Ngāi Tahu. Green button.
Au tūtahi atara, kei te mihi ki a koutou, a ki tēnei wā kua hui mai nei, a ki tēnei rānorara, tēnā koutou. Tuarua, e te menete o te karaune, kei te mihi ki a koe, e te wāhine tō ngā mihi nui ki a koe, tua toru, te kaiwhakahaere o te papa atawhai, ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Lou. Look, thank you for allowing me to join the panel today, and specifically bring some further comments in relation to what's already been shared this morning, not only from Minister Lou, but also our colleagues on the panel. but it's an opportunity just to step you into the beginning world of Predator-Free 2050 Limited. And before I do that, though, I think having joined the board of Predator-Free 2050 was an absolute delight for me, because it sort of took me back to my days of living in the Fiordland National Park. And I think, Lou, you might have been running around in your Rangers outfit down there at that particular time. But it's a fantastic connection for me, and actually reminds me of the significance of what this movement is about, and so I can speak from heart in that sense of practice, not only from where we are from an iwi perspective. And I guess the first thing, if you notice on that slide there, that the board itself is working on its branding. So Predator-Free 2025 is actually, as you all know, Predator-Free 2050 Limited. And the Minister mentioned this morning the board appointments that the board was put in place earlier this year, and we have met once or twice, and the significance of the task in front of us, the aspect of this being a Crown entity, its relationship with the Crown, but also that sort of that degree of separation and the importance of actually the task that goes beyond Crown expectations, but actually steps right into the heart and the pulse of community engagement is important. You can see from the lineup there that we are attempting we've attempted to actually cover all of those facets, from looking at philanthropic, from being on the ground itself, to the science, to addressing the kaupapa Māori aspects that are extremely important, and having that relationship back to the ministry itself. So the board has been formed, and we are on a pathway of actually focusing on those significant points that have been raised. Absolutely the clear purpose, which is about becoming predator-free, whether it's 2025 or moving towards 2050, we've actually got a big task in front of us when we think about rats, stoats and possums, and then looking at others beyond this. The point that Mervyn was making this morning, but also others, is also the significance of the connection with the community. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's actually work alongside those communities. You heard the examples, and that's actually work alongside the communities, organisations that are already doing this work, and look at how we can complement and how we can together move along this toward this big goal of being predator-free. So that will be the task of the board. The other task of the board will be actually looking and addressing the science, the importance and the significance of the science that actually will tell us what we're doing from a practical point of view, and actually what we need to look forward to in the future. And I guess that's why many of you are here today. The overarching result here has to be about the well-being of our community and the well-being of our environment in regards to all of the impact that you have seen over the many years of our both our forests, our species that are now needing that absolute protection. So, look, there are a couple of priorities that the board are working on. Very shortly, as was mentioned, there will be an announcement of the CEO. It's great that we've got a board up and running, but a board actually needs those folks who actually do the real work and actually are informing and getting on with actually their business and the implementation that is set and guided by the board. So that should be announced very shortly. I've already mentioned the importance of the collaboration in the community. This is not a lone task. This is not the development of just another board. This is actually about looking at what is already out in the community, and actually getting alongside and building on that relationship and working together. I just want to focus on the other priority there, which was mentioned this morning in terms of the relationships with iwi Māori. And this is a journey, and I'm no stranger to the challenges of iwi Māori and the not only discussions, consultation, but true rangatiratanga partnership. And this is a journey, and we're at a beginning phase, but what we need to do, and I think because we're at that beginning of that journey, that Predator-Free 2050 can actually look at the relationships that it already has with iwi, can look to the Iwi Chairs Forum, and it can look into the heart of those trusts, those community organisations who are actually already doing the work. And so we won't be without consultation, and true consultation and partnering of consultation will be something that we'll be working towards. I'm quite delighted to be a part of Predator-Free 2050 from an iwi perspective. Ngāi Tahu wrote this into its settlement, so actually we've got the po in the ground already, and you'll hear today from some of my colleagues from Ngāi Tahu who will talk about their species strategy and the alignment and how necessary that is. So I hope I can bring, along with others on that board, that real true connection and partnership with iwi. Look, the last slide there has already been mentioned this morning. What's the difference with Predator-Free 2050? This is an opportunity to actually look at complementing all of those smaller scale community projects that currently exist, and looking at 1 to 3 of those big, large scale projects that exist from the top of Aotearoa right down to Rakiore in terms of Stewart Island. And the difference here being the opportunity to look at funding. So this is not just a Crown opportunity. This is actually about looking at those partners in the community where we can actually look at complementing and sharing the funds that people and families and communities, organisations are actually already putting into creating a predator-free environment. And I understand from the conversations that you've already had and that will be going forward is what is the science and the technology that we're going to be needing to move us through to be accurate in terms of setting out these big goals to 2025 to 2050. Those are the significant parts that the board are looking forward. So I think I'll just leave it there. Rob? Well done.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Arihia, thank you for that. So we've got a few minutes. Let's open it up for some discussion. Are there any questions from the floor about, yes, good morning. Should we just wait for a mic? We'll try and so everybody can hear.
Firstly, thank you all for your contribution and your leadership and your vision. I have 2 questions. One is there an overall plan for Predator-Free 2050? And attached with that, would you have any metrics which would say how well are we doing and how well do we expect to be doing by certain periods of time reaching that goal? And I guess part of that metrics is, this is my second question, do we understand already, have we surveyed New Zealanders enough to know how confident they are with the goals of Predator-Free 2050? And then dividing that down into, so what does that mean in terms of some of the issues that might arise in terms of the use of genetic techniques or the use of toxins? Have you done any of that work? And
right, so I think you've asked the 3 questions there. There's 1 about the clarity of purpose, there's 2 about metrication, and 3rd about public research. I'll have a go at the first and then throw it over to Mervyn and Arihia. The clarity of purpose is very simple for, and the strategy for PF2050 Ltd. And I think the best way to express that is to look at the short-term milestones that we need to achieve by 2025, and they're very clear. There's 4 of them. There's that we will have an additional 1 million hectares of landscape that is under predator suppression. That there will be another 20,000 hectares of 50,000 hectares of landscape that is under where predators have been eradicated. That we'll have the tools to know that we can eradicate one species entirely, which is a really interesting challenge for us, and fourthly, that all the public offshore islands will be predator-free. So that really will determine the strategy. And to achieve those 1 million hectares and to get those acreages means large landscape scale predator management. And so there will be a contestable process as to how we select which landscapes we're going to deal with, and where the value and the benefit is greatest, and the risks are lowest, and all that will be in a process of management. But that's the plan. So, Mervyn, why don't you have a go at the metric question? I think those mics are going.
So we've got a minute or two left. Just one or two observations. Rob's already said the goals have been well set out, and there's... Sorry? Right, okay. Is that better? Right, thanks, Nikki. The goals are set out in terms of the interim goals of 2025, and then, of course, the 2050 goal. In terms of metrics of impact, it's a really fundamental issue. DOC has been building quite a bit of experience in this with measuring the impact of battle for birds, but other parties are also doing quite a lot in that area, and Landcare Research is involved in quite a bit of work. My other, probably final comment is we are doing some social science research and how people will think about this and how they will react and respond, and how we need to connect with them. And that's also a piece of work that's just recently been funded by the Science Challenges. Now, I'm just conscious of our time.
Yes, we are running a bit tight. So, folks, there will be plenty of opportunities during the course of the day to come and talk to us and to discuss some further aspects of this. I don't want to crib time off our next important discussion, which is about uniting the campaign to unite against invaders, against predators. So can I just close by thanking Arihia and Mervyn for their contributions today, and we'll get on with the next session. Thank you very much.